Hello and welcome to another episode of Repeat That Again Please, Unfiltered with me, Genelle. I wanted to talk about something that I speak about at the end of every podcast episode, especially the ones where I have expert guests in. And it happened a little bit by accident, but at the end of each episode, I ask the guest what is an area of compassion and what is an area of challenge for our listeners to take on board about the way they're thinking or feeling about whatever topic it is we're talking about. And I say it happened by accident because I do a whole list of questions for each guest, which I send over beforehand. And on the very first episode I recorded, at the end, I just felt, let me just ask this question. What's an area of compassion and what's an area of challenge? And then ever since then, I've just done it every week. And I think it's a really important and nice part of the podcast because it gives us all a chance to connect with compassion and also with challenge, two things that I think are the balance that brings anything you're trying to do in life, be that personal or professional, to the point of fulfilling its potential. I do think that you need both of those things because the imbalance of having too much of a challenge or too much compassion can often mean that we don't achieve the things that we want to. So that is something that I wanted to delve into today. And another thing that I wanted to talk about is a book that I rate really highly, The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. I will put the link in the show notes. It's a book that I speak about endlessly to anyone I mentor or speak to about life. The 4 Agreements is a book that I think you can live by in both your personal and professional life. And I guess that's because at the core of me, I really think that a lot of our lives are lived through our values, through our character, through integrity, and compassion and challenge just meet at the heart of these things. And the book, The 4 Agreements, also meets us there in ways that I have found personally very helpful as I move forward in my personal life and in my career. This year I said it was going to be the year of Delulu, and it has been an incredible year. And a large part of what I'm thinking about now going forward is how I keep challenging myself to be better, but also to have compassion for myself where things aren't quite going to plan. Childhood to a young adult to a full-grown adult. Sometimes things happen that aren't fair. Sometimes things happen outside of your control. Sometimes your emotions, your feelings, as bad managers as they are, sometimes they take over. It means we don't do the things we set out to do. We don't keep the promises we make to ourselves. We say we're going to eat better, for instance, and then we don't. We say we're going to work out. We say we're going to book that long-awaited holiday at work. We put our hand up, or we say we're going to put our hand up to take on slightly more responsibility. And then, for whatever reason, things do not go to plan. Procrastination sets in, or it triggers a deep down emotion or a feeling, or we just can't quite seem to get it done. We don't have the energy with all the other things we need to do because we have to make money, we have to see our family, look after people. And so sometimes the things that we want just don't happen. And I think this is where it's so important to have that compassion for ourselves, the understanding that sometimes you want to do a thing, but for whatever reason, it doesn't get done. And sometimes it could be your, let's say, fault, or there could be a really good reason, or there's an excuse. But sometimes for whatever reason, it doesn't happen. And so in those moments, be it personal or professional, I think we have to have an element of compassion for ourselves. I talk a lot in my book, The Confident Mindset, about being your own best friend. And so having compassion for yourself is a lot about being your own best friend. About if it was your friend and this happened to them, you would say, oh my gosh, so much going on. Don't beat yourself up about not doing X, Y, or Z, because it's completely reasonable. Sometimes we can think we failed at something when objectively we haven't failed, but maybe we didn't meet the standard that we thought we should achieve, or it didn't happen the way we thought it would. In those moments, the compassion I'm talking about has to come in, has to say, yes, maybe you should have got it done. Yes, maybe you had the time and you didn't plan it well, but sometimes things happen. Sometimes you're not feeling up to it. Sometimes your best is an 80 or a 70% and you can't give any more than that physically, emotionally, spiritually. So compassion has to come in those moments. So when I say have compassion for yourself, I like to think about it as being your own best friend. And when I think about challenge, Now, I know sometimes when it comes to challenging myself and sometimes other people, I've been a bit too heavy-handed on the old whip, especially on myself. I have very high expectations of myself, the things I want to go out there and achieve and become and be and do. The challenge is when you go to yourself and say, okay, you really should have done that, or you really could have paid more attention to that, or you really could have been better here or there. And yes, I know that you're tired, but actually, if you really look at the situation, you're not really challenging yourself for the accountability to say that should have been done. And I do think in this world where we've lived, where there's been a lot of challenge historically, and you should be up at 5 a.m. and you should be running marathons by 7 a.m. and doing all of these things that are quite unrealistic, we have tended to put a lot in the challenge. But I do think recently, as we've started to think more about life in its totality, our minds, our bodies, the way things work, I think we've gone very much into the compassion. And what I'm here to say today is that both of those things are right and needed, actually, but that we shouldn't disregard challenge. We shouldn't disregard finishing hard things and asking ourselves tough questions when we don't, to challenge yourself and say, could I have done it? And to hold ourselves accountable to higher levels of integrity, and to make sure that we are walking our values, and that our character, the way we live our life, the way we do things, that actually we are challenging ourselves to say, was I doing that to the best of my ability? Was I being a good person? Was I ethical? Was I moral? These are questions that I think we should all be asking ourselves in our personal and our professional lives, because sometimes we don't offer ourselves that challenge. And when I think about some of my best and closest friends, they offer me challenge. They don't just give me compassion and say, there, Genelle, never mind, you didn't do it. Sometimes they ask me, what are you up to at the moment? Why aren't you doing X, Y, and Z? Why aren't you going after that opportunity that's got your name written all over it? Being your best friend is not just about the pats on the backs and the hugs. Being your best friend is also asking yourself the tough question. Sometimes with my partner, we'll have an argument or we'll have some cross words, and sometimes he'll say something to me and I think, yeah, but it's you. But sometimes if I challenge myself, yeah, that was me, or yes, that was you and me, and I need to take some accountability for my part in this discussion. And it happens so often. And that's why I really believe in the balance of compassion and challenge, because if you want to move further on in life, if you want to get to the next level or get the next thing that you want, you are going to have to give yourselves both of those things, because they both matter. And I can think about other times in my professional life when I've given myself far too much challenge, bitten off way more than I could possibly do, and then held myself to an impossibly high standard of completing something that maybe I didn't have all the skills for, didn't want to ask the right advice for. Could have done it if I'd have given myself a bit more compassion to ask for help. I think one area that I often think about, and we did a podcast on pensions, and it was really interesting for me to think about my savings and my saving goals, and actually whether or not I had any that were sufficient. And it's quite hard when you remember that you weren't taught loads of things about money at school. With my parents, I learned by watching how they dealt with things, but I felt like I never really understood money for myself, like how it worked and what to do with it. For me, it's an important area of compassion, in that there's a bit of a knowledge gap there. But the challenge for myself was, hang on, you're over 40 now. If you don't know about money, it's because you have not taken the time to inform yourself, to push yourself to have more aspirational goals around savings or debt or money or credit and finance, in whichever way or form it takes, my pension, to really challenge myself to have some higher goals towards that, and to not just give myself the compassion of why there's a knowledge gap there, but then to push on and challenge myself with some accountability, not to make myself feel terrible for what I didn't know, but now to arm myself with things that I should know and that I could know, because all the information's out there. And I think that's an example of sometimes what we can do when we give ourselves a lot of compassion and there's no balance there with challenge. I've managed people before who sometimes feel very sorry for themselves. And yeah, sometimes there's lots of reasons to be sorry for oneself, but also where's the accountability that you're being paid a salary to do a certain role, and what is your obligation to do that? So yes, there are things that hold you back from doing it maybe, and some days you're not 100%, But there has to be accountability on the other side to challenge yourself and say, okay, but as I am here and as I am being paid, what can I do today and how can I manage this scenario better? And I think we can all think about some situations where we have given ourselves so much compassion to the point nothing gets done. And we can also think about the scenarios where we've challenged ourselves so much that we've pushed ourselves into burnout, into actually perfectionism and being unable to perform the task that we need to because we become so racked by self-doubt and we feel just insignificant and that what we're doing doesn't have any value. For me, I'm always trying to think about my peace and my joy. And so a big part of compassion and challenge does give me peace and it does give me joy because it helps me to understand at the root of things that get done and things that do not get done, the things I achieve, the things I don't achieve, the relationships I have, the ones I don't have, the money I have in the bank, the money I do not have in the bank. I have peace because I know, okay, well, this is why I am where I am. And here is how I'm going to be accountable to myself to get to a different destination. And at the top of this year, I really took a good hard look at some of the things I was doing. And I had to say, you know what, Genelle, they're not good enough. And yes, if I look out there, I will always find 10 people who will say to me, you're doing a great job, you're killing it. This is amazing. And with all that's going on and different things, you've done so well just to get to where you are. And I think, yes, that's the compassion. And then the challenge is, what I've done has been good enough to get me here, but if I want something more, then I need to do something more to get to the next place. And so for me, I find my peace and joy from being really honest with myself on both fronts, which is to give myself that, okay, come on, come up higher, but also to give myself the pat on the back and the little hug that understands that things have not always been the way I desire them to be. And I know for you, it will be the same. We can look out into our life and begin to look at those areas that need a little bit more balance. So the 4 agreements that I spoke about before is just such a great short read, and I think everybody should read this book. But the 4 agreements are: be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions, and always do your best. And I had to write those notes on my laptop so that I could remember them. With compassion and challenge, specifically with each of these agreements, I find it so helpful to bring them to life. And the book says it more eloquently than I could right now, but being impeccable with your word kind of go hand in hand. I think we live in a world where people just say stuff and people will just tell you a lie just to slide out of a scenario, and they'll say, oh, well, you know, it's just I don't want to hurt someone's feelings or different things. And I think sometimes we have to have compassion with ourselves because it is tough to have very, very tough conversations. And sometimes it is hard to tell someone the truth, even in love, because it won't be well received. Although comms train a trick, not everything actually needs to be said. That's the hill I will completely die on. But being impeccable with your word and being honest, to me, if you have that value in your personal and your professional life, you will be trusted. And people who are trusted, they go further faster. And so I think have compassion with yourself if you don't like conflict, but challenge yourself to learn how to deal with it. Challenge yourself to learn how to have tough conversations. I've written a book about this, and still sometimes I have trouble having tough conversations because some conversations are hard, because it's not just me in a conversation, there's 2 of us. And so the challenge to myself is always, how can I say something in a way that someone can receive it? So that's also thinking about how to challenge myself with how and when I might have that conversation, the language that I'll use, and the compassion for myself that I might put it off for a little while because it is challenging and tough to have it. So I think being impeccable with your word is possible, and it is possible to really think about, how do I make sure that I do the things I say I will do? And you can't always do it. There's the compassion, but the challenge is, okay, but couldn't you really? And I really think it's about finding that balance, because sometimes the answer is actually, no, I really couldn't. But sometimes the answer is, I really could have if I'd put a bit more effort in. And so being impeccable with your word for me is one of the golden keys to success, to be trusted and for people to know they're dealing with someone who has integrity and is respecting them and respecting their right to make choices with all the information that could be available to them at that time. And so that's why I think being impeccable with your word is so important. But I know that it's not always easy, but we should try and challenge ourselves to make sure that we are. And for some people that are very honest and direct, and I sometimes fall into this camp of being way too direct, it is also to have compassion to the listener of your impeccable word and also really think about having compassion for them, how they may receive what you're saying. But that doesn't mean you don't say it, because clarity is kindness and truth is kindness. And then it's about sometimes deciding whether or not it needs to be said at all. But have compassion for yourself when you don't immediately know the right thing to do, but challenge yourself to make sure that you try and do it. There's probably two things rolled up in there. One's around the honesty and one's around doing what you'll say you'll do. But for me, they're two sides of one coin, and something that I think is vitally important, both personally and professionally. When people lie to me, that is really me out, because I really don't like when people don't allow me to make decisions based on the facts. So be impeccable with your word. And the second one is don't take things personally. And I think this is one of the hardest of all the agreements, to not take things personally. And I think we have to give ourselves a ton of compassion here, because if someone is saying something to you, it feels personal. And so I think we have to give ourselves compassion in that space. But I think it's also about being really honest and challenging ourselves to try to not take some things personally, because some things actually aren't personal. Some people would be that rude if it was you or someone else. Some people would be slapdash if it was you or someone else. Sometimes someone is just having a bad day. Sometimes someone has gotten out of bed the wrong side, or they're frustrated. You're the end of a long line of things that haven't been said, haven't been done. And so I think sometimes it's really important to remember that many things aren't personal unless someone tells you specifically this is personal to you, in which case it is. But I think we have to have compassion for ourselves, that sometimes people do things that hurt and it wounds us and it feels like an attack and it feels like it's aimed at us. But in my own personal view, a lot of life is projecting. So I think it's to challenge yourself to say, is this personal? Is this about me? And the answer might be yes, it's about you. Or the answer might be it's actually about the other person. And so I think this is an area where we can challenge ourselves and have the compassion to understand it feels hurtful because the intent and impact are not the same thing. However, sometimes the intent is actually not personal. It's not aimed at you. It might be the person projecting or any of the other things that I just previously mentioned. To challenge ourselves that, okay, if I didn't take this personally, what would my behavior be? Because the other thing is, sometimes you're taking the bait for something that's not even about you. And now you're getting into an argument and you're getting into a scenario and a situation about something that didn't have anything to do with you in the first place. And now you are in a problem. And sometimes by not taking things personally, we actually edge out of an argument. We edge out of a fight. We edge out of a crossword. It's really hard to do. And I try to not take things personally. I give myself compassion when I do, but I also challenge myself a lot to be like, this is just how that person is. It's not excusing their behavior, but I'm also not here to try and change it. This is who they are. Accept that's how they are. It's not about you. It's about the way they behave. And then adjust your actions accordingly. Don't make assumptions. I find it really interesting how quickly all humans, and we do it because of stereotyping, it makes things easier to process, we can make decisions faster if we fill in the blanks, because then we can make a move on something we want to make a move on. And actually, sometimes our assumptions are dead wrong. In a workshop that I do around communicate for change and inclusion and inclusive communications, I talk about the iceberg that we all are, and how really what we see is like 10% of who a person is. And what we can't see is all the things underneath that makes them who they are: their education, the media they've consumed their whole life, their parents, their upbringing, their class, their gender, the way they see the world. Sometimes when we are filling in the blanks, we're filling in a lot of blanks around all those things which are actually majorly unknowns to us. Just because you see me, a black woman, there's so many things that you cannot assume about my life, about my family, about my upbringing, because we are not a monolith. But so often people take a straw poll, an anecdote of what they know, and apply that blanket. Sometimes people are triggered by things, by the people, because they're making an assumption of what that person thinks about them due to other people they've known that are like that. And this feels like something I felt before. And I have to even mind it in my own biases in myself, that sometimes actually, am I bothered by the thing? Or am I bothered by how this thing makes me feel? And am I assuming intent because of other assumptions that I've got living in my brain? The challenge to yourself and the challenge to myself is immediately when I think I know exactly what this is all about. Do I challenge that thinking, to challenge my assumptions, to challenge my immediate subconscious brain kicking in and adding in the rest of the numbers where there are blanks? And actually, when it comes to being impeccable with your word and not taking things personally, where we make assumptions, it's very easy to take things personally because we're assuming something's about us without really knowing. And I think there's so much, even the people that we know and love, we can't know everything about anybody. And so if we don't make assumptions, if we challenge ourselves, it's better. One thing I always say to people in communication, which is so interesting, is don't state facts, ask questions. If I want someone to do something, I try not to tell them what to do, I try to ask them questions. Because they need to also understand why they're doing what they're doing, and I want to understand why they're thinking what they're thinking. And the only way I will understand that is by not assuming and is by asking. So challenge yourself to ask more questions, to be more curious about why, and to not assume why, and to be compassionate for yourself when you get it wrong. Our guts are great at feeling things, however, they're not perfect. And so sometimes, because you feel so, or there's a gut feeling, sometimes challenge that, because that's coming from a whole load of wiring. The below the surface of the iceberg, which everyone has, you have that too. And sometimes your assumptions are also coming from there. Challenge that always. And then always do your best. I grew up in a household where my dad's personal motto was excellence always. In a sense, it was a good grounding for me to think about always doing my best. My dad used to say, I don't mind what you grow up to do, but just be the best at it. And I think for me, that was just always something that I have tried to do, but I don't always get there. Golf, I've tried my best to be the best, to be the best I can be. And you know what? Sometimes it doesn't actually happen very well. And I have to have a lot of compassion for myself as a learner, as a mature person, not as supple and flexible as I used to be, though I'm trying. But to have compassion for myself in those things where I'm actually trying my best, but my best is not subjectively or objectively what it could be. And I think that's just a really interesting thing to try and think about. There's a drone flying over my head. Apologies that you can hear that drone. But I'm outside enjoying the British summer, so I wanted to record this episode outside. But always do your best and have that compassion for yourself. Also, sometimes challenge yourself, because we're like, I did my best and we didn't even try. But we say that because we feel defensive because someone's challenging our work or challenging us on a personal level of something that we have or haven't done. We say, well, I was doing my best. And maybe sometimes being impeccable with your word and having that honest conversation is, do you know what? I really wasn't feeling my best. And so I couldn't give that my best. Maybe that person did deserve better or more, or at least the honesty, that's what's happened. I think it's always just a really interesting concept to think about what your best means. And I think for me, as I said to someone once, no one comes to work and gives 100% every day. Your best looks different every day. So sometimes that's an 80, sometimes it's a 70, but it will be my best that I have in that moment. But I think, again, phrases like this, which sometimes we just use like, how are you? Fine. So that wasn't very good. Well, I did my best. I think sometimes let's give ourselves compassion that sometimes our best might not be good enough for the task that was required, but give ourselves the challenge that what could I have done to come up higher despite the circumstances? Or did I actually have more to give that I did not give? That is being impeccable with your word to yourself. It's that honesty, that self-honesty, that self-accountability. And that is why I love the 4 Agreements, because I think it's a book that we can all live by and hold ourselves to. It's not about necessarily always holding up the mirror to everybody else. Sometimes it's about, how do I hold this mirror up to myself, to be accountable to myself, but also to be compassionate. I think when we're talking about what does balance look like overall, when it comes to compassion and challenge for ourselves, for the things that we want to do and achieve, and I think it's not about saying we want to find a perfect 50-50 balance. It's more about making sure that we take to the situation what it needs. And the truth is, deep down, we all know ourselves. So we know when we haven't done enough, and we know when we've pushed ourselves too hard. Adjusting to life seasons, you might be in a time of a few months, you might be grieving. There may have been a loss in your life. You may have just had a new baby, or you're in a new relationship, or you just got married, or you just moved in with someone, or you just moved house, or you're buying a house. There are loads of times in life that are tough and challenging, emotionally draining. I say all the time to the people closest to me, everything takes up emotional capacity, even good things. And we only have so much emotional capacity. It's not infinite. And so what should we be trying to do in every season of life is not always saying 50-50, give myself compassion and challenge. It doesn't actually work like that. It's about understanding, in this season of life, do I need to give myself more compassion? And if I need to give myself more compassion, more time to do things, well, then that means I need to be more impeccable with my word about the things I can and cannot do. That is compassion to self and compassion to those around you, so they understand what you can actually achieve. But then in some seasons, we need to give ourselves more challenge. I was so good at the gym last year on my fitness journey, and then this year I was like eased up a little bit, giving myself a lot of compassion because I'd done so well, and now I'm not doing so well. So now it's time to challenge myself again on, okay, it's nothing close to where I was at all, not by any stretch, but it's also about saying to myself, okay, now I need to challenge myself to not hit that snooze in the morning, but to jump up out of bed like I was doing before, because it can be done and I can do it. I have eased off and I am finding a more healthy equilibrium in my diet and kind of in my life, but I still need to challenge myself if I want to stay fit and healthy. That is not a one and done race, it's a continuum. And sometimes it's in my work, in my business, that yes, I came out of a really busy time, but now I need to challenge myself on the business development, think more about the sales. It's no point just being like, no one's calling or I'm not doing this. No, where's the challenge? Here's a target and I want to work towards it, but equally not flogging myself in my business to the point where when I don't have anything to give, I'm still trying to give something. It doesn't make me a good business person. It doesn't make me good at my job. What makes me good at my job is when I'm living my life in some sort of balance, understanding what I need and also understanding what my clients need. So my compassion and challenge to you today is to really think about the balance in your life. Have you been kind to yourself about the things that you're going through? Have you checked in with yourself about the amount of things you're trying to do and the things you're working on and the fronts you're pushing on, both personal and professional? Have you been compassionate enough to yourself? But also, did you challenge yourself to grow today? What did you do to hold yourself to your word and to finish? Or what did that look like, and how did you push yourself to do something that did really need to be done? Have you had that balance? And what areas in your life need more balance? What areas in your life do need more compassion, and what needs more challenge? I think these are sometimes good questions, especially at the beginning of the month, to check in and say, what does this look like? How am I growing, but how am I caring for myself also? Some things that I try to do to keep my practice, the With Gratitude app, and I'll put the link in the show notes, and join the With Gratitude app. And every day writing down 3 to 10 things I'm grateful for every day. Do one with a Repeat That Again Please community. I would love for you to join. Gratitude helps us to have a lot of compassion and challenge because we see how blessed we are, or the things that are going right, the things we can be thankful for. And so that's something that I really try and do. So I do my With Gratitude app, my fire memos, recording my wins, which I've not been so good on lately, but recording my wins in my fire memos app, and also just trying to do my daily meditations and prayer practice as a way of kind of checking in with myself and how I'm feeling. And of course, talking to mentors, talking to friends, talking to my parents, my family, and just really seeing how life has changed for me and being super grateful, but also now challenging myself on the things that I really need to kick into touch. If I could leave you with one thought today, and thank you so much for listening to Repeat That Again Please. I am so grateful for everyone that listens. I would love you to identify one area in your life right now that needs more compassion, and identify one area in your life right now that needs more challenge, and to think about how you are going to do that, or give yourself that gift and give yourself that bit of balance in that area to ensure that something that you need to happen or want to happen actually does happen. And I'd love for you to read The 4 Agreements, an amazing book, or to listen to it, get your head around those concepts and how they can apply to the personal and the professional, because I think it works in both. And I'd love you to share any reflections that you've had with me. I do love all the messages when people get in touch. It really encourages me and warms my heart. Someone got in touch with me about one of the old episodes about the weight loss and the apps I was using, and it just always really makes me smile when people find the podcast, let me know they're listening, and let me know if it's useful or helpful to you. Thank you so much. Please do like, rate, subscribe, share this episode with anyone that you think it might be useful for. And I'm really grateful that you got this far and listened today. And I look forward to speaking to you soon.